is a silent tragedy unfolding around us, not one broadcasted with violence or catastrophe, but a slow erosion of spirit, a quiet death of self. You see it in the eyes of the man who never says no, in the hesitant smile of the man who apologizes for his own existence, in the drained posture of the man who has spent his life trying to be good, only to be discarded the moment he is no longer needed. This man is the nice guy, courteous, polite, selfless to a fault, and suffering beneath a mask he can no longer bear. Friedrich Nietzsche, long before this tragedy took root in full, saw it coming. He warned that a society obsessed with taming instinct, suppressing aggression, and sanitizing the soul would not birth enlightenment, it would birth weakness. Not a compassionate weakness, but a resentful, hollow one. The nice guy, Nietzsche would say, is not harmless because he has mastered himself. He is harmless because he has been emptied. He has been taught that goodness means passivity, that love means self-erasure, that strength lies in compliance. And so he moves through the world like a ghost, terrified of offending, desperate to please, bleeding out his identity one concession at a time. He becomes the man who always understands, who never demands, who suppresses his fire for the sake of social approval and is rewarded with nothing but invisibility. The tragedy of the nice guy is not that he is good, it's that he is dishonest. Dishonest with himself, dishonest with his anger, dishonest with the parts of him that are meant to protect, to challenge, to conquer. He kills his own instincts in the name of acceptance, but instincts do not die quietly. They rot, they fester, and eventually they turn inward as resentment. Nietzsche understood this all too well. He called it the sickness of modern man, the internalization of the will to power. Instead of expressing strength outwardly, through action, through creation, through bold living, the nice guy is taught to turn that power inward, to suppress it, to shame it, to hide it under layers of niceties and passive smiles. But what is repressed does not disappear. It corrodes, it twists itself into bitterness. And eventually, the man who once only wanted to be loved begins to hate the very people he tried to serve. And yet, society praises him all the way down. It tells him he is doing the right thing by neutering himself, that he is virtuous for abandoning his needs, that he is evolved for rejecting his dominance, his ambition, his primal drive. And the nice guy, desperate to believe it, plays along. He agrees. He nods. He smiles even when humiliated. He gives even when drained. He forgives betrayals that should have been confronted. And he calls this virtue. But Nietzsche would not call it virtue. He would call it decay. Because real virtue, he knew, is not the absence of strength. It is the mastery of it. It is not weakness disguised as kindness. It is power held in conscious balance. The truly good man is dangerous by choice, not by default. He knows he can destroy, but chooses not to. He knows he can dominate, but chooses collaboration. His goodness is not a mask for fear. It is a triumph of spirit. The nice guy, however, has no such triumph. His goodness is not earned. It is an avoidance of self, a capitulation to fear. And because it is rooted in fear, it can never create respect, only pity. This is why the nice guy is so often abandoned, by lovers who once praised his sensitivity, by friends who once leaned on his endless tolerance, by communities that once celebrated his agreeableness. Because deep down, people do not admire those who bend at every breeze. They admire those who can stand firm against the storm. Even those who claim to want a nice guy do not want one. They want a man who is good because he chooses to be, not because he is incapable of being anything else. They want strength that chooses mercy, not weakness that has no other option. And so the nice guy's reward is heartbreak, loneliness, confusion. He cannot understand why his sacrifices are not repaid, why his niceness is not enough, why the very people he sought to please now look at him with contempt, boredom, or pity. But Nietzsche understood. The world despises the man who erases himself for approval, not consciously, but viscerally. Because somewhere deep inside we know a man who cannot say no cannot be trusted to truly say yes. Without boundaries, there is no real generosity. Without strength, there is no real compassion. Without self-respect, there can be no respect from others. This is the first part of the nice guy's tragedy, that he is betrayed by the very ideals he clings to. But there is a second tragedy, even deeper, the one he enacts upon himself. In betraying his instincts, he also betrays his potential. The nice guy suppresses not only his anger, but his ambition, his creativity, his leadership, his drive to carve his place in the world. He hands over his sword, believing that to be noble, and is shocked to find himself defenseless in a world that respects those who wield power with purpose. Nietzsche would call this a spiritual castration, the mutilation of the soul's primal forces in the name of fitting in. The man who was meant to forge, to build, to conquer his fears and manifest his vision, instead becomes an expert at navigating social expectations. He becomes, as Nietzsche wrote, the last man, comfortable, agreeable, safe, and utterly empty. You see it in his tired jokes, in his hesitant posture, in his desperate over-explanations, in his constant apologies for simply existing. He believes that by making himself small, he becomes lovable, but all he becomes is invisible. And eventually, resentment boils over. The nice guy who spent decades being good begins to hate the very people he tried to serve. He becomes passive-aggressive. He withholds. He plays the victim. He lashes out not with fire but with guilt. And in doing so, he becomes the very thing he was trying to avoid: bitter, weak, alone. This was Nietzsche's warning, that without the cultivation of strength, without the integration of instinct, the man who seeks only to be good becomes a hollow imitation of life itself. He is not alive. He is tolerated. The world does not need more nice guys. It needs whole men, men who can stand in their truth, even when it is uncomfortable, men who can love without losing themselves, men who can be kind without being cowards, men who can be generous without being exploited. And above all, men who can look into the mirror of their own soul, confront the chaos within, and emerge not sanitized, but sovereign. Because only then can you give love freely. Only then can you offer strength without domination, tenderness without neediness, presence without performance. The journey begins not by adding more niceness, but by reclaiming the parts of you you were taught to abandon. Your anger, your desire, your ambition, your fearlessness. These are not your enemies. They are your inheritance. And until you claim them, you will remain trapped, forever repeating the tragedy of the nice guy, forever wondering why doing everything right feels so wrong. When the nice guy wakes up, it does not begin with a roar. It begins with exhaustion. He is tired, not just in his body, but in his soul. Tired of explaining, tired of smiling when he wants to scream, tired of apologizing for existing, tired of shrinking, bending, silencing, waiting, tired of performing a life that was never truly his. This exhaustion is sacred. It is the death rattle of the mask. And from this exhaustion, a question finally arises, not whispered, not tentative, but full-throated. What if I stopped? What if I stopped apologizing? What if I stopped chasing? What if I stopped living in terror of disapproval? This is the beginning of reclamation, not through anger at the world, but through loyalty to oneself. Nietzsche would say that this moment is the turning point between the last man, comfortable but hollow, and the Übermensch, the the man who transcends the need for validation altogether. Because real transformation is not about flipping a switch. It's about burying the corpse of who you were taught to be, so that who you were born to be can finally rise. The first step is brutal honesty. No more pretending that being nice has made you happy. No more lying that being agreeable has brought you respect. No more rationalizing that sacrificing yourself has created real love. The truth must be faced head-on. The nice guy strategy failed. It didn't fail because you weren't nice enough. It failed because it was based on a lie, that your worth was something to be earned from others rather than lived from within. You must grieve that lie. Grieve the years spent chasing love instead of cultivating it inside. Grieve the relationships that only existed because you abandoned yourself. Grieve the boyhood dream that if you were just good enough, you would be loved perfectly. And then, after the grieving, comes the confrontation, the shadow. Jung and Nietzsche both knew that every man has a shadow, the parts of himself he has exiled, suppressed, denied. His anger, his lust, his ambition, his hunger for freedom, his contempt for conformity, his hunger for power, not power over others, but power over himself. The nice guy fears his shadow. He believes it will make him bad, monstrous, unworthy. But the truth is the opposite. The man who owns his shadow becomes whole. It is the man who denies it that becomes toxic, resentful, manipulative, passive-aggressive. To integrate the shadow is not to become cruel. It is to become capable. Capable of saying no, capable of walking away, capable of enforcing standards, capable of disappointing others to remain true to yourself. This is not about domination. It's about sovereignty. It's about becoming dangerous, not to others, but to the forces that once controlled you. Because a man who cannot say no is a man who cannot say yes freely. A man who cannot feel anger cannot truly feel love. A man who cannot hold his center will always be pulled into orbit around others' needs. Integration is messy. It requires sitting with your rage without being consumed by it, facing your fear of abandonment without letting it dictate your behavior, owning your sexual energy without shame, honoring your ambitions without apology. You do not destroy the nice guy to become cruel. You destroy him to become complete. And when you do, the world responds differently. At first, you will lose people. Friends who only loved the version of you that bent over backward. Lovers who only stayed because you asked nothing of them. Jobs that only valued you for your willingness to be silent and obedient. Let them fall away. Because what remains after the mask is gone is something rare, authenticity. You will walk differently, slower, straight, not rushed by the need to be liked. You will speak differently, less. But when you do, it will carry weight. You will love differently, not as a beggar, but as a sovereign offering. And slowly you will begin to attract a new tribe, people who respect your boundaries, lovers who desire your truth, not your performance. Friends who meet you eye to eye, not from above or below. And perhaps most importantly, you will begin to respect yourself, not for what you can do for others, but for who you are when no one is looking. Nietzsche believed that life is not about comfort, it's about overcoming, about transcending the small self, about creating a life so true to your essence that it roars even in silence. He warned that the danger of modernity was that it would encourage men to trade greatness for approval, power for safety, authenticity for applause. The nice guy is the ultimate victim of this trade, but he does not have to remain a victim. He can become dangerous, not in the sense of harm, but in the sense that he cannot be controlled. He can become whole, not by rejecting kindness, but by rooting it in strength. He can become free, not because he is loved by everyone, but because he no longer needs to be. The man who no longer needs permission to exist is the man who finally begins to live. He stops waiting for the world to validate him. He stops waiting for love to make him whole. He stops living in fear of disappointing those who never loved him for who he was anyway. He chooses himself, fiercely, unapologetically, consistently. And from that choice, a new life is born. A life where no is not a threat, it's a boundary. Where anger is not a loss of control, it's a compass pointing to what matters. Where solitude is not loneliness, it's sovereignty. Where love is not earned, it's offered. The tragedy of the nice guy is not that he is doomed. It's that he was never told the truth. You do not become lovable by erasing yourself. You become lovable by becoming fully, dangerously, beautifully yourself. And when you do, when you rise from the ashes of the boy who only wanted to be liked into the man who demands his own respect first, you will find something incredible. You were never too much. You were simply waiting to become enough for yourself. And once you are enough for yourself, you will never again need to beg the world for scraps. You will feast at the table you built with your own hands. And that, as Nietzsche warned and hoped, is the only kind of life worth living.